So this time we're going to focus on what to do when you find yourself dealing with a toxic culture.
But my overriding point is that you don't just take your external tone of voice and slap it internally. And I'm saying this from things I've seen from certain toxic culture exposés recently, where they've just taken verbatim their external tone of voice and slapped it right down in the faces of their people. And that's not how you do it. It's about taking aspects and elements of your tone of voice externally and nuancing it for your audience, playing those tones up or down depending on the message. And when you're dealing with something like a toxic culture expose internally, you need to be playing all your sensitive human aspects of your personality.
But for me, the biggest thing that you've got to bear in mind is that it's going to take time. Whatever you're doing, it's not going to be a quick fix, even if it's a sudden problem that you've come across rather than a long-term build-up. You've got to accept it's going to take that time. You've got to be genuine about what's happened. And I think that's one of the hardest things, to be genuine, admit fault if that's appropriate, but to not be defensive about what's going on, and just to be the wholehearted, I got that wrong, we got that wrong as an organisation, whatever the scenario is. And to be aware that your people are likely to need time and possibly help to understand their feelings about it. So they're not just going to take your apology and move on. You know, you've got to do the work. You've got to do the work to regain that trust. And I think sort of final.
And so the first thing that I would say is, as a leader, as a leadership team, stop, pause is the first thing to do, because normal human responses to that kind of event happening will be that you may feel under attack. I'm not saying sit there for a week, right, saying nothing, but do pause, and then, you know, get some good people in the room who can help advise you on what to do next. Get good people in the room to advise. And that's not just your lawyer and your PR person, right? That is people who understand your employees, your culture, you know, how people are really feeling and how to work with them going forwards.
It's never the case that nobody knows.
No.
It's toxic and suddenly it comes as a great big surprise.
Absolutely. And I think Engage for Success co-founder Nita Clark has this wonderful phrase, doesn't she, which is that employee voice is the best smoke alarm you will ever have. And
there's never any substitute for literally just going and talking to people. It's something that I've always advocated, and I don't care how big your organisation is, you can still do that. You really, really can. And if you aren't doing that as a leader, then I think you haven't understood leadership properly.
I think one of the first things you can do is you can have an alarm go off. Anytime anyone says, oh, that's just Bob, that's just the way it's always been done, that's just working in a bar, it's always been like that. As a leader, you've got to be willing to examine and change your own behaviour and beliefs and values. And that's the hardest part. It takes
also you've got to be brave, and you've got to want to hear uncomfortable truth.
Yeah. Humility and courage.
And you've got to encourage those. Then you've got to create these forums for listening, and you've got to be prepared to pull your big boy pants right up and hear some really uncomfortable.
Or girl pants.
Or lady pants.
Oh, we're going
all sorts of pants. But to face uncomfortable truths and to use them as an opportunity to change for good, and not put your head in the sand.
And I think we hit here the problem we have with leadership culture still. I mean, not just in this country, but I think worldwide, which is that we value ego to some degree. We really do. And so, you know, if you're not an egotistical person in that way, you struggle to be seen as a good leader, a strong leader. And so humility is not something we currently value in that leadership position.
Humility and courage, they're both really important, but actually you could argue, people would think, well, how can you have both? You know, how can you be the big...
We think courage is this.
Yes,
right?
we think it's
courage is...
But it is...
Courage is taken from the word for heart. It's about compassion. about having heart. And courage isn't the absence of fear, as Charlotte said earlier on. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway.
I think actually that leads on to a really important point about behaviours, and toxic cultures will often arise in an absence of behaviours and in absence of managing your culture. And I thought, I mean, that it's such an important point, that having frameworks of behaviours, and actually within those behaviours, allowing people to call out bad behaviour, empowering people to do that, is a really important way that you can manage your culture as much as you manage your brand, which is clearly important and missing in many organisations.
Yes.
So you have to look at all of those things in a system to really think about and I call them culture levers. You know, what are the levers that you need to pull to really have that impact? And you can only do that if you've been really clear and intentional, as Charlotte has said, about these are our values and these are the behaviours, which are values in action. I know that's a Woodreed, phrase that you guys use often, but that's absolutely, it's the clearest way of describing it for me. Your behaviours are your values in action.
But the other thing to do is to make sure that you're not seeing these things in isolation. I think you probably just made that point, Lorna, that a lot of organisations see values and behaviours here, and then processes here, and then organisational objectives here, and sort of vision there. And actually everything is intrinsic and is interconnected, and you need to see it all as one joined up piece and not in bits.
Yeah, absolutely.
The iceberg model of culture, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. So we're not going to be able to fix these things overnight. We can't heal them overnight, but they can be healed by taking a holistic approach, by applying humility, by being courageous, and by taking the time to really think about not only how you live your values, how you behave on a day-to-day basis, how your leadership model those values, but also how your systems and processes and structures enable or get in the way of that.
Is that listening to your people is absolutely key. Constantly listening to your people is key. And also clear communication is absolutely important as well, because if you don't tell people, if you don't communicate clearly, people will fill in the gaps or make it up for themselves. And that's where little pockets of toxicity will start to develop.
We've got to be honest and open and transparent about the why and the what, because you're absolutely right, people will fill in the gaps otherwise.
If this is ringing any bells with anybody out there that's experiencing this or experiencing this as a leader, work on yourself, do the work. You know what you should be doing, have the courage to do it.